You have found Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggles, stories, and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. Past episodes of the Authentic Business Adventures program can be found in the podcast link at drawincustomers.com. We are coming to you from the Sun Prairie Community Radio Studios, underwritten by Bank of Sun Prairie. My name is James Kademan, entrepreneur, author, speaker, and helpful coach to small business owners across the country. Today, we are welcoming / preparing to learn from Ruth Rolick from the city of Madison. Ruth, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for being on here. You got to tell me, what is it you do at the city of Madison?
You bet. I am the business development specialist for the city of Madison. I work in the Department of Economic Development.
Okay.
And what I do mostly is work with businesses from around the world that are thinking about moving to Madison. Businesses in Madison that are growing and expanding.
Okay.
Businesses in Madison that are just having a really hard time navigating through our systems.
Sure, there's that.
There's that. And then I also work on special projects that are mainly financial assistance for businesses.
Holy cow. So you're bored most days.
I'm totally bored most days.
Just nothing going on. So let's start with the first thing, dealing with businesses that are considering coming to the city of Madison. Mm-hmm. Because we always hear about either companies moving out of, like when GM left Janesville, right? Yep. Stuff like that. And then there's other companies that are vying for Madison. I imagine, can you just tell us how that works?
Sure.
Let's just say if some, I don't know, Monster Incorporated wants to come here and it's between Madison and 17 other cities or something like that. Do they come to you or do you have to find out about them? Or?
Well, they usually come to us in a couple different ways. We partner really closely with the state of Wisconsin.
Okay.
So the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation might get a statewide search.
Okay.
And that search might lead them to Madison. We also get leads from the Madison MadRep, the Economic Development Regional Group.
Sure.
And then sometimes we just get straight up calls to the city from companies who are doing site searches.
Wow.
Usually they're working with a site search selection organization.
Okay.
Kind of like a national or international commercial broker.
Sure. There's companies that do that?
Yep.
That's their job, is to help a company pick out a city?
Exactly.
I just feel like that sounds like a job like picking out paint colors.
I know, right.
Like, can you really do it wrong?
I know. Well, that's it. And it's Madison's an interesting economy because we have a very low unemployment rate comparatively.
Insanely low.
Yeah.
Yeah, to
a
fault.
So it's actually hard sometimes for companies to find workers at the lower pay scale.
Sure.
But we have a really highly educated group of folks, and we are a draw for young people for the rest of the state. So,
sure.
Companies can get employees here if they have enough of a draw. And so usually what cities are looking for is information about the workforce. Information about the price of land or where they could locate.
Sure.
Information about our technology systems. And then often the companies that are interested in Madison are also really interested in what the lifestyle is going to be like for their employees. So they tend to be companies that place a real high value on having, an open, fun community for younger employees.
Sure. Which Madison has in spades, right?
It's an easy selling point.
Sure.
There are a lot of cities across the country that are really struggling in keeping companies and businesses around.
Sure.
Madison, we're really lucky because, we do have such a low unemployment rate. We really don't do proactive searches.
Sure. Where you're soliciting other companies, more or less?
To other places. And a lot of times we can't compete at that level because we don't have free land to give away, and we don't have those kinds of incentives. But working with the state, we do have some really good incentives on the employment side.
It's so interesting when you're mentioning all the things that a company has to keep in mind when they're choosing a city. I would think that the cost of the land itself is probably on the verge of negligible.
It can be, but it can be really
Like, I get that there's a cost there, but like, hey, we got cheap land. We just don't have any skilled labor anywhere near us.
Right. And that happens a lot, especially, when states compete against each other. There are a lot of especially southern states that have land available, and so they can make really great incentives, like we're going to give you all this free land, or
Sure.
Financial tax incentives.
Sure.
And the state of Wisconsin actually has some pretty good tax incentives, especially for manufacturing companies in that regard. But, the city of Madison, our property prices are pretty high comparatively.
Sure.
So that determines what kind of cities are interested in us.
Gotcha.
Like, it wouldn't make economic sense to build a humongous warehouse somewhere here. It'd be smarter to go a little bit outside of the city to do that. But yeah, so that's kind of it. And more, especially with the work of the regional MADREP, the Regional Economic Development Group, we're definitely looking at our neighbors not as competitors, even though that's shown in the paper a lot, like business move to Middleton or something.
Oh, the Madison versus Sun Prairie type stuff? Okay.
And we don't feel that way. I mean, it definitely benefits all of us to have strong neighbors and a strong central city. And I think more and more communities are starting to look at it like that. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't even know that was a thing until fairly recently. I guess when I was learning about Menards, moved from Madison to Sun Prairie. Right. And at first I thought that's kind of an interesting move. Like from Menards' point of view, I'm sure they had some reason for doing it.
Yeah.
I don't know if they use up stores. I don't know. Just look like a building to me.
Yeah.
But that's above my experience level, I guess, as far as that goes. But it was interesting. I thought that they didn't just move across the street or a few blocks away. They moved a couple miles further north and east outside of Madison.
Right.
So I wonder, like, there had to be some Sun Prairie you-rah-rah and then a Madison you-rah-rah trying to solicit Menards to either stay or to come to Sun Prairie, whatever.
And, not talking specifically about that situation, but Sun Prairie has a really wonderful economic development group with their city. Okay. And we work with them a lot. Neil is his name. And what we find, especially with stores like Menards and some of the bigger box stores, just their footprints grow so much. And they require so much parking and really easy access that they tend to want to be a little bit further out of the city.
Gotcha. Okay.
And, I know that for the east side of Madison, like, it's great to have a Menards right near you.
Sure.
But it's not that far.
It is not.
For folks to go.
No.
And so, we still feel like it's an asset to east side Madison.
I'm certain that Home Depot still considers them a competitor.
Right.
So,
right. So
it's 2 minutes.
Yeah. And Madison we also have some zoning rules about larger box stores too, that sometimes, and I don't know that in the case of this, but these larger stores have questions about and maybe want to expand beyond what will be allowed.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect segue, though, because you work for the city of Madison, and the city of Madison has a terrible reputation when it comes to working with businesses, right? And I have to tell you from my experience, I don't have any huge gargantuan business. Like, I don't have some 100,000 square foot grocery store or something like that where I'm having all these issues.
Yeah.
But I hear stories. And some of the stories, I was like, really? It seems kind of weird. So can you just touch on that?
Yeah. I think that from what I've learned more and more about sort of the way city governments interact with businesses, there's always a push and pull there.
Oh, okay.
I think with Madison, we are working really hard, and city staff tries to be helpful and friendly as much as they can. We are guided by some regulations that are pretty stiff, and some of that goes back to trying to protect the quality of life for residents too. So there's always that push and pull. But I think we're trying really hard as a city to get better and better at how we interact. And a couple ways we're doing that in the last few years is we started these business walks where we've, in the last 3 years, have visited over 2,000 or 1,500 businesses. To ask them, what do you like doing in Madison? what don't you like? We ask those questions too,
Sure.
because we really do want to hear where people are getting stuck.
Right.
And we're starting to find out that there are a couple places where small businesses, especially, are getting really stuck in our systems. And so, as part of that, we've developed this group called the Business Assistance Team, which right now is city staff.
Oh, really?
So the heads of different departments and
Okay.
city staff that interact with businesses. And we're starting to look at where these pain points are to try to figure out what we can do.
Sure.
One of the biggest pain points that we found, just as to use an example, is our sign ordinance. So
There's a huge elephant. Right?
yeah, that's a big one. And so we're trying to figure out exactly what is the issue. Some of the issue is when you drive around town, you see all these signs.
Sure.
And you're like, I had a sign like that and I got fined.
Right.
How did that happen?
Right.
And so we're trying to do two things. One is to communicate better to businesses that a lot of the signs that you see are actually illegal.
Oh.
And so, we obviously don't have a team of 100 folks going out and enforcing them all.
Sure. I think you have 2, right?
So sometimes, we have a handful of building inspectors
Okay.
that can do that. But I mean, that causes pain because it's like, well, if that guy can do it, why can't we do it? And we're like, well, really, that guy can't do it either.
Sure.
So that's one. And the other is to try to catch businesses earlier in the process of when they're designing their signs, to help keep them in compliance.
Sure.
And then eventually maybe even look at some of the regulations that we have and work with the mayor and the city council
Sure.
to see if there are things that we can do. And one place where that's been the case is with sandwich boards.
Yeah.
Boards, yeah.
The sandwich boards.
They're not legal for a long time. And
Sure.
now our zoning folks are trying to work to set up a way to kind of get permits for them to
Sure.
allow people to use them.
Sure.
Because as small businesses, and I think, we mentioned this, I used to own a retail floral shop in East Johnson Street. My sandwich board was like my lifeline.
gold, right?
Man.
Yeah.
I love that thing, and every day it was so personal, and I decorated it, and I had it outside my store, and it was totally illegal now.
Sure.
I didn't know it at the time because
Sure.
I would see other ones, so
Right.
I'm like, okay, you can do this. And, I think as a business owner, when I first heard that, I was like, that's ridiculous. Why would that ever be illegal? And then we start looking at causes and problems that I would have never thought of. Like if, for example, State Street has a ton of them.
Sure.
And sometimes to protect them, businesses were chaining them to their front door. So then there'd be a chain across the sidewalk.
Oh, sure.
And then that not only
Trip
causes a
hazard kind of thing.
hazard, but also for people in wheelchairs.
Sure.
It's just an access issue. And they're just things like that I think people don't think of right away.
Sure.
And so, trying to figure out a better way to kind of compromise on those things and knowing how important they are to businesses is something that, we keep looking at. So that's
Sure.
just one example of an issue that's a pain point that, we're continuing to try to address. So.
No, I understand that puts you in a challenging position, right? Because
Yeah.
you're not the one making the rules.
Right.
And are you the one that enforces them?
I don't do any enforcement.
You're kind of in between, I imagine.
in between.
So you get to be the sounding board for people complaining,
Yeah.
right? Like,
That is.
I have zero control over either
Yeah.
end, and here you are, the one that just has to take all the heat for it.
Well, I think what I try to do is, and I often describe what I do in situations like that is almost like a translator.
Sure.
Because, I was a business owner. I still feel like I speak the language of businesses.
Sure.
I know that pain of the small business owner. And to try to really explain that better to the city council, the mayor.
Sure.
And then staff to just say, especially, signage is a great example of it because it's so personal. That's your logo.
Right.
That's your identity.
You
Usually
spent a lot of money, and you put a lot of thought
money,
into it.
A lot of thought. And it just is such an emotional moment, too, when you, hang your shingle up.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? And then, so to try to explain that it's not just like a, straight up business thing.
Right.
There's a lot of emotion attached to it.
Yeah.
And, and
True.
businesses can point to the fact that certain signs bring people in.
Sure.
And so it's a real important thing. So, just trying to communicate back and forth so both sides can better understand the
Sure.
point of view.
Oh, it's so interesting. I just, that whole coffee shop thing that was on, was that Willie Street where they painted the thing black?
Oh, on State Street, yeah.
State Street? Was it State Street?
Yeah.
Okay. And then all these people that just never cared before, all of a sudden just jump on the bandwagon and hating on this coffee shop owner, new coffee shop owner.
New coffee shop
And
owner.
all I could think is, how much does it take to start a business, just in time, money, and effort?
Oh my God.
And now all these people that didn't give you a second look, all of a sudden are complaining that you painted this building black.
I know.
I would just be like, really?
I know.
Really?
It's so hard.
Does it
That stuff
really
is
matter?
So hard. Yeah. And
This is-
that's also something, Madison is very attached to how things have always been. And
Sure.
so, I think the Landmarks folks, and it sounds like it really was just a miscommunication, but
Sure, but then it's paint.
it's
You can
a
always
hard
remove
thing,
paint.
yeah.
It was paint on brick. It wasn't
Yeah.
like paint on the Mona Lisa or
right,
something.
yeah.
Like, you guys are really getting up in arms when technically this paint is probably protecting your precious brick. So
Right.
settle down. I just think there's so much to know and deal with when you're starting a business that when it comes to sign ordinances and stuff like that.
Well, I think mostly it's like people just really don't know.
No, how
and
would you?
wouldn't even think. And that's really how I was with my business. I really didn't even know. I
Sure.
mean, with the signs that I put up, which now I know were all illegal.
Right.
But it's
Appreciate the honesty.
yeah,
That's awesome.
totally. And they can't get me now, I don't think. But it wouldn't have even occurred to me to call the city to ask about it, and my landlord didn't share that information.
Sure.
And so I think
Maybe he or she didn't know, right?
I don't. Yeah, I'm sure they didn't know.
I mean, it wasn't the hot topic
No.
6 years ago, right?
No. Right. No.
We had other problems.
Yeah, there were other
or at
things.
least we were trying to solve other problems.
Yeah. But one thing that we're really trying to do is get out more and be much more proactive. That's part of the business walk.
Sure.
To say, hey, our office is here, the Office of Business Resources.
Mm-hmm.
Call us. Mm-hmm. No matter how big or small. And I mean, we get every kind of
Well, that's awesome.
complaint
Okay.
or concern or
Sure.
problem. And we'll help figure it out.
Nice.
And just try to be much more proactive. It's hard to get the message out to everybody. But,
Sure.
this show might help. So.
No, right? Absolutely. You're reaching millions of people here.
Right.
So I can't tell you, I was on, I don't remember if I did 2 or 3 walks. And it was interesting because you're going to these businesses and at first you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like a traveling salesperson.
I know.
Right? You're just knocking on doors. But then I remember the most recent one we did on Atwood. We ended up talking. I was with some lady that I never met before, so her and I had a good conversation as we were walking down. It's always raining, apparently.
Yeah, I know.
As we were walking down Atwood, and we walk into this building that wasn't really clearly marked what it was, but it was a business of some kind. Turns out it was a studio of some kind, whatever. Anyways, I think we talked to that woman for 40 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And at first it was almost like a shotgun through the door, like, what are you doing here,
Right.
kind of thing.
Wait, who are you? Yeah.
Yeah, but then we're like, yeah, we don't have any pull. We're just collecting information is essentially what's going on. If you don't want to talk to us, tell us to take a hike and we'll gladly move on, right?
Yeah.
We're totally not making money from this.
Right,
so
right.
it's costing us time, which,
Yeah.
So, but once she put her guard down where it belonged, yeah, we kept talking. It was interesting because this woman had been in this building for, I want to say 30 or 40 years.
Oh, my
Crazy
gosh.
long time.
Yeah.
So she was telling us about the history of Atwood and all that's going on and a lot of stuff going on, which she wasn't a huge fan of.
Uh-huh.
And she was like, so she had tons of advice
Yeah.
and good information that I don't know any other way that we could have gotten that.
Right.
You
Right.
couldn't have mailed her a survey or emailed her
No.
a survey.
No.
There's only one way you're going to get that, and that's in person.
It is in person, and also it's with business owners like yourself. Business owners talking to other business owners. If I just went door to door, I would get some information, but not the same kind of really
Oh, their walls would
honest,
be up.
candid talk.
They'd be like, yeah.
And these business walks are just golden to the city right now. I think we're still figuring out because we're getting so much information, and
Sure.
the information is put into like a really nice, pretty report, but also just that aggregate data, just
Sure.
the forms that you guys are filling out. We go through all of those, and we make so many follow-up calls, and and we also just get a lot of calls as a result of it. And I think more than anything, it's just starting to really kind of bridge that divide and allow us to get some real aggregate data from the actual business owners.
Oh, sure.
And business owners who don't participate because they're busy.
Right.
So we have that a lot with a lot of our committees and stuff. Like, we're always looking for more
Sure.
of the business voice on them.
Oh, interesting.
But that's a really hard thing for people to commit to.
Sure.
They're just so busy. So
Yeah, they've been poring over sign ordinances for the past 3 months.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
I just want to know if I can have a sandwich board or
Right.
not. I can't take the time. So let's downshift into the businesses that you had before. How long has it been since you said you had a flower shop?
I did. I had a retail floral shop. I did mostly weddings on East Johnson. And I had the business for about 10 years. I had the retail part for about 5. And that actually has been a while. That was, I think I closed in the retail part in maybe 2010.
Oh, wow. So it has been a while.
It has been a while. And then after that, I worked for about 5 years with the Wisconsin Women's Business Initiative Corporation.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I teach for
know
them.
you're
Yeah.
Yeah, you teach for them. I was the project director of
Oh,
the
wow.
Madison office. So Andrea Hughes is the project director now.
Oh, nice.
And I love that job. I could I worked really closely one-on-one with
Sure.
small businesses. WIBIC does education, and then they also do lending. And we're actually, the city is partnering with WIBIC right now on our Kiva loan.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Which is really cool. And so that's very, very exciting. So,
Nice.
I still get to work with them a lot, which I love. And then I went back to school. I got an executive MBA, so I did it on the weekends.
Okay.
And then took this job with the city. So
Nice.
I'm with
How long have you been working for the city then?
so now I'm with the city 6 years, so I think I've done my math wrong. Might have been,
Sure,
go back.
whatever.
I don't know.
Doesn't no one's gonna double check.
Yeah,
If they do,
yeah.
that's fine.
It's on my resume.
Yeah. Put it up
I
there.
forget
Whatever.
dates, yeah.
So tell me, you had this flower shop for 10 years.
Yep.
So did you buy it or did you open it from scratch?
I opened it from scratch.
Did you really?
Yeah.
That's
I
awesome.
had worked, it's actually kind of a neat story that doesn't happen that much anymore, but when I left UW, I started working for pharmaceutical companies in Washington, D.C., and I was doing kind of government relations work. And
Sure.
I moved back to Madison, but in between, I'd always worked in flower shops, and I'd done weddings for friends on the side.
Okay.
And I was working for a really cool company in Madison called Powder Jet Vaccines when I moved back to Madison.
Okay.
And they were a biotech company.
Gotcha.
And after working there for like 3 years, we were bought out by another company.
Okay.
And they decided to close our shop. So, but
Funny story.
Funny story. But it was actually this really kind of beautiful story where the company that bought us was a company from California, and they gave us just the most generous severance packages.
Oh, very
And they
cool.
also gave us 3 months with support. Like they brought in career counselors and folks, and we could use the equipment and take time. We just had to wrap up our projects.
Sure.
And at that time I thought, well, I've always wanted to do this.
Sure.
I got a little money.
Well, better time.
I got about 3 months so I can start writing a business plan.
Sure.
And I went for it. And so I got an SBA loan, and I opened the retail shop. And then the retail shop took up all my money and time.
That severance is gone.
Yeah. And then all my money was coming from weddings, which was all word of mouth anyways.
Sure.
I didn't need the retail to do
Sure.
the weddings. So after about 5 years, I closed the retail and I just
Okay.
did weddings for a while.
Sure.
And then started working at WIBIC, and I was still doing some weddings. And then eventually I just decided when I started the MBA program that
Sure.
I just didn't have time to do it anymore. So
So was it making money or was it just a lot of work or why did you end up closing
why did I
it?
close? So that's a really good question. So I was, and this is like something that I learned the hard way. And when I was at WIBIC, I really tried to teach people this. There was a lot of value in that business. I closed with having some debt still. I sold most of my equipment. I sold some of my accounts.
Okay.
But I had 3 big problems. The first problem was I had a terrible lease in the beginning.
Oh, no.
My first location.
Like 10 years or something?
It was an awful, I did get out of it, but we had a legal battle and it was really ugly.
Okay.
And it's just one of those things where it's like,
you just didn't know any better kind of thing?
Yeah, get more advice. Now,
sure.
I say that because knowing that I did have an attorney that looked at the lease and said, don't sign this lease. This is a horrible lease.
Oh, no.
And I was like, it's just the perfect spot.
Oh,
and the
rainbows
landlord
and
is so
moonbeams.
nice. Yeah. And it was like just a terrible mistake. So that was one. So that ate up.
So hold on a second. You had an attorney tell you not to sign it?
Yeah.
And you're like, nah, I'm like, I got this.
You don't know how cute it is.
That's awesome.
No, and I think that that's something that just I see over and over again with people. Like, you set yourself up, you're getting all the advice, but you get yourself your mindset
people fall in love
around something and you just don't take the advice.
Sure.
And it's like, take the advice.
Gotcha.
They know what they're doing, especially when it's your first time. So that's definitely, I always give that, especially with leases. I mean, like,
that's
really.
So fun. That's like a real estate agent telling you not to buy a house they just showed you.
I know.
You're like, nah,
oh,
it's cute. It's
and then
so
it just
cute.
Like, sinks into the ground one day.
Sorry about the dragons in the basement.
Yeah. They're fine. So
awesome.
that was one. So that ate up a lot of money. It took a lot of time. It beat me down. It was just a really tough thing. I ended up in a really good situation. I moved into another storefront on East Johnson and had really positive time after that. But it was just a really hard thing to recover from. The second thing is I made some pretty bad tax mistakes. So it caught up with me. So I the original way I set up my books, again with advice, but I misunderstood, or I just didn't do it right. And part of what I did was consulting on weddings, and so I was taxing that a little bit differently, and as a result, I owed sales tax. And so that caught up with me too. So then I was paying those off, and they're all paid off now. But that kind of caught up to me real quickly, and I was able to correct it really quickly, but there was still this back tax I had to pay. So how was that discovered, or how did you learn that you're supposed to be charging sales tax a certain way? Well, I eventually got advice from someone, and they were like, I don't think you've been doing this right. And then we kind of self-reported, and then we went back and did it. So yeah. And then it was like things, it was just, it just snowballed. It snowballed because then it was like behind payments on sales tax that was like due that month, and it just snowballs a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're like, and now I owe $6,000. So
once you get in that hole, it's tough to get out.
It's really hard. I will say that this is the advice I mean, not like this, I don't know if I should be giving advice, but
you can totally give advice. With the mistakes that you've made, that you've learned from, you're saving people money and time. That's all good.
I would say the one thing with the tax thing is just, no matter how scary it is, call right away. Because especially the state, they want to work it out with you. They do. And I think one thing that I do see now, and I saw at Wibbick too, is that people get, when you have a small business, it's lonely. And it's really hard to admit to people, like, I am struggling. And also, like, I kind of don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know how to get out of this mess. And that's what they're there for. You are going to have to pay it back. You're all going to have to figure out something to do, but they really do want to work with you. They really do. And it just relieves so much of your own pressure that you're putting on yourself if you're just really open about that stuff. And I wish I'd been more on it and less afraid to start making those phone calls. Because even 1 month, 2 months go by, and it just escalates. And
you
so
get the letter in the mail that says you owe $5 gazillion.
And you're like, oh gosh.
Funny.
So, and then the third thing is that I was not great at managing staff. I had a really hard time, especially with my weddings. Allowing other people to take on parts of it, because I just had so much control over them and wanted them to be perfect. I had wonderful brides. I've done hundreds of weddings. and I loved doing that. But by the end, I was doing 2 or 3 weddings a weekend. It was
Oh, wow.
exhausting.
Sure.
I did have staff. They were wonderful, but I could not relinquish
Oh,
enough control. And I just kind of drove myself into the ground and got so exhausted
Sure.
that I wasn't thinking real strategically about when I decided to get out. And I wish I had spent more time coming up with some kind of plan before I reached that point of exhaustion.
Sure.
Because there was a lot of value there, and I think I could have sold the business, not for millions of dollars, but at least enough to kind of close it without
Sure.
carrying debt with me.
Gotcha.
So I learned a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I loved it, and I still love, flower arranging
Sure.
and helping people plan
Sure.
their weddings. But
So tell me about the time, like there had to come a moment when you're like, I gotta walk away.
yeah, well, I think one of them was my mom was like a great sounding board. So my parents, everyone in my family are lawyers, and most of them work for either nonprofits or for the state. Or
Sure.
and so no one is an entrepreneur in my family, so they just thought this whole thing was crazy from the beginning. But they were really, really supportive. Like my dad would take off work and drive from Milwaukee on Valentine's Day to help do deliveries.
Nice. Sure.
And sometimes he would help me set up. This is just a cute aside story. He'd help me set up and deliver for weddings. And the first one we did, it was in Galena, Illinois.
Sure.
So we were driving for a long time, and he was asking me questions like, "What's it going to be like when we get there?" And he's like, "So what should I say to the bride when I get there?" And I'm like, "Nothing. Don't talk to the bride. Don't look at the bride. Like, we're the hired help. Like, I don't want you anywhere near the bride." And then
Sure.
of course, 20 minutes into getting there, I could see him talking to the bride. I'm like, "Dad," but she loved it. So
Funny.
it was really cute. But one of the things, and my mom was a great sounding board, and I was so exhausted, and I was crying, and I was really stressed out about the tax thing. And, my mom was a lawyer, and she's like, "It's not like you're going to go to jail or anything. Like,
Sure.
you're working this out." And I said, "I think I'd want to go to jail so I could just sleep and read books for a while." And then she said, "Okay, I think you're really stressed.
Oh, sure.
And you need to take a break and evaluate
Sure.
what's going on." And so, I realized that, again, all my expenses were going into the shop. All my profits were coming from weddings. I didn't have to have the shop to
Sure.
do the weddings.
Mm-hmm.
All my weddings were coming from word of mouth. And so I just thought, okay, I'm going to see what it looks like to just start doing weddings, not in a retail environment. Sure. And so I did that for a while. And then I just realized, I don't think I want this to be my life's
Sure.
work. It's a lot of work,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard work. And, I don't know that I can maintain this.
Sure.
And so at that point, I knew I was ready. And I have to say, the hardest part was just saying that decision out loud. And then as soon as I said it out loud, I was like, I felt so much relief.
Chains are off. Let's do this.
It is. And then I everything opened up to me. So that's another thing, is like when you're really agonizing over something, it's like once you make that decision, usually you're going to feel really good about it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I guess that whole story, in the end, I tell people that we'll build their own prison.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So when I'm teaching those classes at WIVIC, the business planning classes, you see some of these businesses that people are designing that in their head,
Yeah.
they're magical, right? They're
Right.
super awesome. This is my dream come true.
Yeah.
And you get it on paper in the business plan, and you see the logistics of it and the expense and what they can make for all this work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that really what you want?
Right. You don't. Yeah, you don't. And I mean, and also when you're first planning your first one, it's like you take on everything right away. And at WIBIC, one of the big things that I always try to really explain to people is like, start small. People always want to rent a place. Like that's their first thing. And that's going to be your biggest expense. And it's going to just drag you down. And a lot of, especially in the new economy, like, a lot of times maybe you just need a desk at a co-working space or something. Like you don't need, a big building or something. But it's just so hard to get that vision, to bring down that vision a little bit of what you have, that dream. And, you know, I always say, like, flower shops, coffee shops, those kind of things. Like, people would come in every day and say, oh, this is my dream come true to have a flower shop. And I would
Here's
allow
the keys.
for
See
the
you
dream.
later.
Yeah, I'd be like, I know, it's wonderful. And then they'd leave, and I'd go cry in the back room for a while. I was right next to the store, Cork and Bottle, the liquor store in East Johnson for a long time. And we always joke because whenever I'd have employees come in the afternoon, and I'd, you know, kind of be holding it together, and I'm like, okay, you know, great, I'm going to just go take a break. And then I'd go to Cork and Bottle, and they'd let me sit on their basement stairs and just bawl.
Oh, my God. Really?
It was so stressful for a while.
Oh, no.
And that wasn't every day. There were a lot of really, really happy days and fun days. But by the end, I was just, it was getting really hard.
Sure.
So, and then that's, you know, when you realize, like, okay, this is not a good thing.
No.
I don't want
I didn't
this
put
to
in my
be
business
life.
plan that I'm going to spend an hour a day crying on the
No.
stairs.
No.
How will you spend your day?
Yes. From 3 to 4.
Sulky and hating every decision I've ever made.
Right.
Okay.
Feeling like a failure.
Wow. That's so incredible. I appreciate your honesty with this. This is cool.
Oh yeah. I love telling the stories of that because I do think it helps. I do think it helps people to realize, like, it's okay to be lonely and scared. And
Sure.
a lot of small businesses, it's a lot of times it's like just you and a few other people.
Right.
And often they're your employees. And it is lonely. It can be really lonely.
No, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with, I think it was another class over at DWD. And I'm like, there's more than enough help in the state, the country. SBA has a bunch of stuff. Their website's got incredible information. You look at even locally, we got WIBIC, we got Small Business Development Center, you got just SCORE. I mean, tons of places that offer help. The limiting factor is the business owner or the potential business owner that is just afraid to ask.
Yeah.
Afraid to admit that they don't know.
Right.
And I'm like, it is totally acceptable for you to know whatever it is you're doing business-wise. Like, if you know plumbing, you're a great plumber, fantastic.
Right.
Nobody expects you right off the bat to know all the business stuff. You can totally ask.
Yeah.
This is like 5,000 people that have made the same mistakes. We
Right.
don't need to make it 5,000 more times.
Right. That's totally true. It's like all of a sudden you feel like, oh, I need to know how to, you know, fill out all these tax forms and do all this employment stuff. And it's like, no, you don't. You need to figure out how to make enough money to hire people to help you do that part of it. And consider that like a money well spent.
Sure.
You know, and yeah, I totally agree.
Nice. Let's talk about, let's back up now and talk about the business plan, because you put together a business plan.
Yes.
For the flower shop.
Yeah.
Did the flower shop the first few years follow the business plan?
No, not at all.
That's totally awesome.
Not at all. And that's one of those things, like, one regret is that I definitely didn't use it as like a working document. I think what I got focused on were like my QuickBooks.
Sure.
Which is a good place to be focused.
Sure.
But that's only giving you one snapshot of what's happening. And it kind of kept me, I think, a little too focused in the immediate, the day-to-day, what was happening that day, instead of really kind of moving towards what I had originally planned, which was not to be like a huge store or grow, but to have more staff and help. And I think in the beginning, I got myself really afraid to start spending money that way. And then what you do then is then you're mopping the floors and clean, which you're going to do anyways those first couple of years, but you're not spending time, you know, really kind of marketing the retail part of the store, getting more corporate clients, you know, things that would have really balanced out the wedding. So maybe I wouldn't end up having to do as many weddings as I was doing. Because definitely in my business plan, I had that all balanced out better. But, you know, you start getting calls for weddings and they're paying a lot of money. And so you're like, okay, that's what, you know. And so, that was definitely one regret. I kind of did it. And then I kind of put it aside and really just focused on the financials and not that vision part. So I think that was an important mistake.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Would you, if I was to come to you and say, hey, I'm planning on opening up a flower shop, what would you tell me?
I would say don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. I know. I always feel that bad when I hear people who have never owned a business before and haven't worked in like restaurants or something. They're like, I want to open a restaurant. It's like,
oh my God,
don't do it.
Are you crazy?
But if it's in your blood and you've worked in restaurants,
sure.
I would say go for it. I would say do a really good business plan and really think about how you want to be set up.
Mm-hmm.
More and more florists are focusing just on special events.
Oh, interesting.
And so that allows you to not have to do that, 9 to 5 retail
sure.
part, which can be really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of different ways to do it. And I would
sure.
really try to encourage you to not have just one vision in your head of you like an apron clipping beautiful lavender on
right.
a beautiful sunny day, and to and also to make sure that you've really worked in
right.
shops before, because it's a lot of just schlepping and
sure.
cleaning buckets and it's dirty,
right.
and
it's organic stuff,
do
right?
it if you love it.
Sure.
And I still have a lot of friends who are doing it, and they're all doing it in a million different ways.
Oh, really? Okay.
And it's beautiful.
Any of them retail?
Some of them are retail. George's Flowers
sure.
is a place I worked for a while, and that is one of those that they're a true family business for decades and decades. I mean, George is like 90 now, and
sure.
he's still there every day. So they're just a beautiful family story. Yeah. Of and really working hard their whole lives.
Sure.
And then I have another friend, Mary Jo, who she and her husband own a farm, and so they grow most of their own flowers, and it's very organic and beautiful. And they're selling at farmers markets now, and I think it's called 5 Green Acres, and so there's just a million different ways to do it. So really figure out what kind of life you want to have, and blend it into your life if you can. So
one thing that intrigued me when you said that you owned a flower shop, I've always been curious about the flower delivery.
Oh yeah.
How can a flower shop make any money delivering flowers?
Oh my gosh, it's harder and harder and harder now. But you'll see now, I think when I had my shop, which again was, gosh, now that I think about it, 10 years, 15 years ago.
Sure.
My delivery was $4.95, which was way too low.
You're talking like $5?
Yeah, $5.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're fine.
But now I think most places are like at $10 or more. The economy of flowers, it's actually, do you know the book Kitchen Confidential that Anthony Bourdain wrote?
I know of the book, but I haven't read it.
So it was like an expose of kitchens. There is a flower book called Flower Confidential, which is the same thing, which is just the expose on flowers.
Really?
Because flowers are very, very interesting. They're grown all over the world and shipped overnight.
Yeah.
To like aggregation centers. Most of the aggregation centers for Wisconsin are in Chicago.
Okay.
And then there are wholesalers in Wisconsin that go to Chicago and then bring the flowers and then process their flowers and then sell them to the shops, right? And all of that has to happen in just a few days. There are huge environmental and really bad labor practices in developing countries around flowers. There are areas in Africa where there actually is modern day slavery and children involved in processing and cutting flowers. In South America, there are stories, a lot of roses come from South America, and there are stories that like if it's going to get too cold, they'll start burning the rainforest around to kind of create an artificial environment to keep the flowers safe. So there's all this interesting things. So the economy of flowers is really, really interesting. Delivering them in town, especially now that with the internet, that there's so many places that you can order them from, and there are a lot of places you can order directly from, like California, those aggregation centers. It makes it harder because those could also have delivery prices of like $10.
Sure.
So you're really competing with the whole world now.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it is something that
I was just thinking, like with the one of the other things I don't understand in regards to delivery, right, is pizza and people, right?
Right.
I saw some Chinese food places will do delivery as long as it's at least $20. I'm like, even then.
Yeah.
Even because you got to pay that person, let's just say that you're paying them $10 an hour, which in Madison, no way.
Right.
Not for very long, anyways.
Right.
Not if you want them to show up. And you got a vehicle, you got insurance, you got whatever product that you're delivering.
Yeah.
And like, there's so many expenses on top of that
Yeah.
that I don't know how.
It's hard. And with pizza and Chinese food, people are expecting that. So, I think a lot of it is tips. You're
Oh, sure.
banking on tips, and
Okay.
hopefully you get enough tips to make it worth it.
Right.
But with flowers, you don't know they're coming, and
Right.
so you don't get tipped.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think even back then I was paying like $12 or $13 an hour for my drivers, and I had them for just a few hours a day, which was really hard because
Sure.
people need more time than that.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't really afford. So it's really, honestly, sometimes I would just close up shop for 15 minutes and do a quick delivery.
Sure.
Which is not a good practice.
Right.
But,
It's got to be done.
yeah, it's
right?
got to be done. So, but that's something that you have to like really try to come up with really look at the numbers to make sure that
Right.
you're at least breaking even on the delivery.
Right.
Yeah.
Dang. Was there a lot of margin in flowers?
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of margin in flowers. And
'Cause
also,
I feel like you just listed 3 middlemen at least.
oh yeah. Yeah.
Plus
and,
the slave labor, which
plus, right. I
guess
mean,
that's cheap. But.
yeah. And also it's perishable.
Oh, sure.
Right. So it's very perishable.
Right. And fragile, I imagine.
And fragile, very fragile. And, if your cooler breaks down or something like that happens, or maybe it gets too cold, you can lose everything, especially when you're dealing with weddings.
Sure.
You order months ahead of time.
Do you really?
Yeah, to try to get exactly what the bride wants.
Okay.
But flowers are also a little fickle. So it's
Sure.
like certain flowers are now, there's so much science gone into the growing of them
Sure.
that they can come on pretty well on target. A lot of my brides, what they liked about what I did was I did a lot of local purchasing. I definitely purchased from the wholesalers too, but I also worked with a lot of local farmers. And you can't guarantee that it's
Sure.
going to be that perfect shade of red or pink.
Right.
There are variations in it, especially
Because it's natural.
the more organic you
Sure.
go. And so, that balance of expectations is really hard too. But and that's just something that, you just learn as you go, like what's selling, what's not selling.
Sure.
But
Interesting.
it's hard. It's hard. And a lot of times you're just throwing away buckets and buckets of dead flowers
Oh,
that just
really?
didn't move.
Okay.
Or had a problem.
Okay.
When they got there, and then you negotiate with the wholesaler or try to get some money back,
Sure.
or credit or something.
Interesting.
But it's a lot of negotiation. Yeah.
Tell me about the employees that you had from a hiring standards or hiring practices, I should say.
Yeah.
Stuff you did that way, and how did you get them to the place? How did you train them? Since you were wearing so many hats, I'm just curious about
Yeah, and I was really bad at it too.
that. Okay, that's
But-
okay. So am I.
I had wonderful employees. Definitely when I started, I had a lot of friends that would help and family.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, and then I was in that Tenny Lapham neighborhood, which is kind of the near East Side, and so I had a lot of college students, and that was great because they were young and enthusiastic, and they liked
Sure.
working there. But it was also hard because then Saturday mornings were my busiest time.
And they're
'cause
all
I'm loading
hungover?
up vans to go, and they're hungover,
Sure.
or there's a football game, or
Sure.
their friends in town, and so that was really hard.
Oh, sure.
And then, I had a couple of delivery. I had a couple of really great delivery drivers, and then I had a couple that were just like, one time, one of them, he was just clearly stoned, and I'm like, I can't let you drive the van today. And so there's those uncomfortable situations
Sure.
too, because I'm so dependent on them.
Right.
But you have to have a certain level of
Sure.
standard too. And I think that's a hard thing, especially in a tight economy like this for small businesses, is that like you want to have standards, but if that person keeps showing up every day,
Right.
I mean, that's worth gold.
Oh, I've seen the quality of service that just in customer service drop as
yeah.
wages have gone up
Yeah.
because companies just have to find someone that will show up, right?
Right. And if you're showing up, I mean, that's
Yeah.
80% of it. Like,
Yeah.
I can deal with the other 30, but
Like
it's
we'll
really
accept a subpar service because we have the service.
Right.
I feel like we're getting down to where construction industry has been for decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? If maybe centuries.
So,
Where it's just like, hey, crappy service, high prices. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is really hard. And I made a lot of mistakes. I mean, I definitely did not do good kind of onboarding and training.
Sure.
I wish I had done more of that. I had a couple like wonderful employees that really wanted to help and do so much more than I could let them. Like I just had a problem with trying to control too much.
Sure.
And you get into a little bit of a fatigue too, and part of it is like learning about yourself, like why do I insist that things are done this way?
Sure.
When they're the ones up front, working with the customers and they want it done this way.
Sure.
They want things to go this way.
Sure.
I wish I would have listened more to what they had to say. The first time I had to let someone go was one of the worst days of my life.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so bad. And I got through it, and then I just cried and cried and cried and cried. And I still see this person sometimes, and they're so nice, and they understood what was going on.
Sure.
And so I wish I would have just been a little bit stronger during that, and a lot of it looking back was me more than them even. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I always say it comes down to the manager, right? It's the person in charge.
Yeah.
And in the end, whether it was a bad hire or bad training or bad motivation or whatever you want to insert there, right? And it's tough.
It's always a
because you're wearing so many hats as a business owner. But in the end, it comes down to the boss, right?
Right. It does. And it is something that, like, especially if you've never, managing people in a company or like at the city of Madison is totally different. You have this huge support around you, and you have laid out rules already. And so, when you're kind of just doing it on the fly, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. And I don't think every business should have like a full employee manual, like that might be overkill depending on the size of your business, but you should definitely write and think those things through and take time and even some expense to talk to an accountant or an attorney or go to WIBIC or the Small Business Development Center or SCORE and get some feedback on it before you do it, because, and everyone says this, I'm sure a million people have said this on your show, like it's so easy to hire, it's so easy to it's so difficult to fire.
Yes.
It is so much harder to let someone go for a million reasons, legal reasons, but also just emotional reasons. Especially in a small business, you get really connected to people, and their families, their
that's their livelihood, right?
It's their livelihood.
Yeah, you made a promise to them. I always tell my employees, like, I made a promise to you that I'll pay you and help you in any way I can.
Yep.
You're making a promise to me and more so the company that you're going to do the job that we pay you for.
Right.
So if at any time a promise gets broken on either end, we got to just walk away.
Right. Yeah,
so that's what it comes down to.
It is.
Right?
Yeah,
it's just a promise on both ends.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So let's upshift really quick. We don't have a whole lot of time left here, but in regards to the city of Madison, the job that you have now, I'm super impressed that you had a business and you had a business for a while and you made some mistakes, whatever, it doesn't really matter. In the end, you have that experience. Yeah. So how would you say that really helps you in the day-to-day?
I think it helps me so much because when people know my story better, especially small business owners, I think that they feel much more comfortable opening up to me and being honest about, what's going on with their business. I think it also helps a lot because I can be that voice in city government that just says, hey, I've had this experience. And I can tell you what they're thinking. It's sort of that translation piece.
Gotcha.
We also have another person in our office, Mike Miller, who owned a restaurant. He co-owned Kip's Down Home Catering. It was a restaurant.
Oh, nice.
They were on Monroe Street for a long time. And so he's also there to talk and work with businesses. And he does a great job with the restaurants and everything. So I think between the two of us, the city really made a conscious decision to try to find some people that had experience with small businesses.
So it was conscious, like you said.
Yeah. And I think we were one of the first that were hired this way. And I think it's just been really successful in like helping to just start those conversations. Government is a long process. It's not a overnight. Things get solved. But I think everyone right now that I can see internally is very committed to try to start figuring out ways for
Sure.
to better support our small business community,
That's
especially
awesome.
all of our business community.
Sure. Awesome.
So,
Well, Ruth, thank you very much for coming on the show. This has
thank
been a
you.
blast.
This is so fun.
This went so fast, didn't it?
I know, it sure did.
This has been Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggles, stories, and triumphant successes of business owners across the land, coming to you from the Sun Prairie Community Studios, underwritten by Bank of Sun Prairie. My name is James Kademan, and Authentic Business Adventures has been brought to you by Calls on Call, offering call answering and receptionist services for small businesses across the country, on the web at callsoncall.com, as well as Draw In Customers Business Coaching, offering business coaching services for entrepreneurs in all stages of their business, on the web at drawincustomers.com. And, of course, The Bold Business Book, a book for the entrepreneur in all of us, available on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold. We'd like to thank you, our wonderful listeners, as well as our guest, Ruth Rolick from the city of Madison. Ruth, thank you again. This has been a blast. I think we learned
Thank
a
you.
lot of what
Yeah,
not to do.
this
That's
is
so
fun.
cool. And what to do. Don't start a flower shop. Find us airing on 103.5 Wednesdays at 1 p.m., Sundays at 2 p.m., as well as at sunprairiemediacenter.com. Past episodes can be found morning, noon, and night at the podcast link, found at drawincustomers.com. Thank you for listening. We will see you next week. I want you to stay awesome, and if you do nothing else, enjoy your business. With no crying on the stairs.
No
right?
crying on the stairs.